Every time you tap your foot to a rhythm or feel a sudden wave of relief when a highly dissonant chord finally resolves at the end of a symphony, your brain is actually executing a primal survival mechanism. You might think you are simply enjoying a piece of music or admiring a painting, but under the hood, neurologically speaking, your mind is practicing how to survive in a deeply unpredictable world. The feeling of beauty, the sense of aesthetic pleasure, is not some accidental byproduct of human culture. It is arguably the very pulse of biological adaptation. Today, we are looking at the profoundly biological nature of art. We will explore how the aesthetic impulse, our drive to seek out, create, and appreciate art, stems directly from a living organism's need to find equilibrium within chaos. This isn't just a philosophical metaphor, it is a measurable neurological reality. By examining the philosophy of John Dewey and bridging it with modern neuroscience, specifically the concept of predictive processing and the free energy principle, we can fundamentally change how we understand what art is doing to us. It is not a luxury, it is an exercise in mastering the chaos of existence. Part 1. The biological roots of experience. To understand why a painting or a song holds such power over our biology, we have to travel back to 1934, when the American philosopher John Dewey published a book called Art as Experience. Dewey was deeply frustrated by the way modern society treated art. He felt that we had placed art on a pedestal, locking it away in museums and concert halls, treating it as something ethereal, spiritual, and entirely disconnected from the grit of daily life. Dewey wanted to bring art back down to earth, or rather, back down to the body. Dewey argued that the roots of the aesthetic experience are entirely biological. He looked at the fundamental reality of being a living creature. To be alive is to be in a constant, dynamic exchange with your environment. But this environment is not stable. It is fraught with danger, change, and unpredictability. Therefore, a living organism is always falling out of step with its surroundings, losing its balance, and then struggling to recover it.
Dewey noted that if the gap between the organism and the environment becomes too wide, the creature simply dies. But if the creature successfully bridges that gap, if it overcomes the tension and recovers its equilibrium, it doesn't just return to its previous state, it grows. The recovery is enriched by the friction and the resistance it just survived.
Think about the simple act of walking. Walking is biomechanically a series of controlled falls. You propel your center of gravity forward, intentionally throwing your body out of equilibrium, and then you catch yourself with your foot. You lose balance, you recover it. You lose it, you recover it. That creates a rhythm. For Dewey, this rhythm of loss and recovery, of tension and resolution, is the absolute bedrock of what we call the aesthetic experience. When an artist creates, they're essentially taking this biological rhythm and refining it. They're intentionally introducing a disruption, a moment of chaos or resistance, so that they can guide us through the process of resolving it. The pleasure we feel when looking at a perfectly balanced composition or hearing a melody return to its root note is the deep cellular satisfaction of an organism that has successfully adapted to its environment and survived a moment of instability. Art is the stylized, concentrated version of just staying alive. Part 2. The neuroscience of chaos and order. Dewey was writing in the 1930s, relying on observation and pragmatist philosophy. But if we fast forward to modern cognitive neuroscience, we find that his biological theory of aesthetics maps almost perfectly onto our current understanding of how the human brain functions. To see how, we have to look at one of the most prominent frameworks in contemporary neuroscience, the free energy principle, pioneered by neuroscientist Carl Friston. The free energy principle is a mathematical model that describes how biological systems maintain their order and resist the natural decay into entropy. In the context of the brain, this principle suggests that the brain is essentially an intricate prediction engine. It is trapped inside the dark, silent vault of the skull, receiving constant, chaotic streams of ambiguous sensory data from the outside world. To survive, the brain cannot simply process this data passively. It has to constantly generate internal models and make predictions about what is causing those sensory inputs. When the brain encounters something it didn't predict, a sudden loud noise, a visual anomaly, a disruption in a pattern, it experiences what neuroscientists call surprise or prediction error. In Friston's framework, this surprise is quantified as free energy. Because surprise usually correlates with danger in the natural world, biological systems are driven by a fundamental imperative: minimize free energy, minimize surprise. When your brain successfully updates its internal model to account for a chaotic environment, when it finds the pattern and minimizes the prediction error, it rewards itself. It releases a hit of dopamine. This is where the aesthetic impulse finds its neurological engine. When we listen to a piece of music, our brain is rapidly, continuously trying to predict the next note. If the music is utterly chaotic, like random static, the brain experiences massive prediction error, high free energy, and we find the noise unpleasant or stressful. We tune it out. But if the music is perfectly predictable, like a metronome ticking at a constant speed, there is zero prediction error. The brain figures it out instantly, there is no biological puzzle to solve, and we become incredibly bored. Art exists in the precise vibrating space between those two extremes. It is the neurological sweet spot of free energy minimization. Part 3. Rhythm, tension, and resolution. Let us look at how this plays out in the actual mechanics of art, because artists, whether they know it or not, are essentially hacking this predictive processing system. They are playing with our biological desperation for equilibrium. Take syncopation in music, for example. Syncopation happens when a composer places an accent on a weak beat or removes an accent from a strong beat, completely disrupting the expected rhythm. When that happens, your brain's prediction is violated. Free energy spikes. You experience a microdose of biological tension, a sudden loss of equilibrium. But then, the music swings back. The rhythm realigns with the underlying time signature. Your brain frantically recalculates, recognizes the broader pattern, and successfully predicts the return to the beat. The prediction error is resolved. The free energy drops, and you get a rush of dopamine. That physical compulsion you feel to bob your head or dance to a syncopated groove is your nervous system celebrating its successful adaptation to a complex, shifting environment. This exact same mechanism applies to visual arts. When you look at a massive, chaotic, abstract expressionist painting, your visual cortex immediately starts hunting for statistical regularities. It looks for edges, color balances, fractals. It is trying to tame the visual noise. As you study the canvas, your brain slowly builds a model of the artist's visual grammar. The chaos resolves into a coherent, balanced whole. The aesthetic pleasure you feel is the relief of your brain finding order. Dewey recognized this deeply. He wrote that the artist actually cares for the phase of experience where there is resistance and tension. The artist doesn't shun the chaos, they cultivate it. They build up the tension just to make the eventual resolution that much more satisfying. It is a simulated survival scenario safely contained within the borders of a canvas or the duration of a song. We practice losing our balance so we can feel the triumph of catching ourselves. Part 4. The legacy of biological aesthetics. Understanding the aesthetic impulse as a biological adaptation profoundly shifts its cultural legacy. For centuries, Western philosophy often operated on a strict division between the mind and the body. The mind was elevated, capable of pure reason and spiritual contemplation of beauty, while the body was viewed as something base, animalistic, and separate. Dewey's philosophy, now validated by predictive coding neuroscience, completely shatters that division. It tells us that our most transcendent emotional experiences of high art are intrinsically tied to our physical animal nature. The aesthetic impulse is not a flight from the physical world, it is a deep, immersive engagement with it. Now, there are some debates and criticisms surrounding this view. Some cultural theorists and art critics worry that reducing art to a biological survival mechanism, or to the mere minimization of free energy, strips the magic away. They argue that this evolutionary lens ignores the profound social, political, and historical context that give art its specific cultural meaning. If art is just dopamine and prediction errors, does a Beethoven symphony mean the exact same thing as a catchy pop jingle, so long as both resolve tension? It is a valid concern, but a biological approach doesn't necessarily erase cultural meaning. It simply provides the canvas on which culture is painted. The specific patterns we learn to predict, the specific dissonances we find meaningful, are heavily shaped by our culture and our lived experiences. What is completely unpredictable to one person might be deeply familiar to someone raised in a different musical tradition. But the underlying mechanism, the human drive to seek out tension, to engage with chaos, and to find a rhythmic, balanced resolution, that is universal. It is written into our biology. Art is how we practice living in a world that is constantly trying to throw us off balance. It reminds our nervous system that chaos can be ordered, that dissonance can be resolved, and that equilibrium, even if temporary, is always within reach. If you found this exploration of our biology and art thought-provoking, send this episode to a friend who loves music or painting and see if it changes the way they experience their favorite works.